couple of weeks ago, Duet Display introduced Duet Pro. Now, Duet Display has always turned your iPad into a second monitor for your Mac or your Windows computer. But with this most recent update, they've added pen support for the Apple Pencil on iPad Pros that turns it into a full-blown drawing tablet. Now we have all that accuracy and pen pressure, and we can use our favorite desktop programs on the iPad. I've been using Duet Pro for about 3 weeks now, and I can say that I ran into some bumps early on, and for those who follow me on Twitter, you probably noticed me tweeting out some of these things that I was running into. The folks over at Duet saw these tweets and they said, "We are working on some updates. Can you please hold off a little bit? We want you to see the latest and the greatest that we're rolling out." And I have to say, it has improved dramatically just in the last week or two with some of these updates. One of the things that separates Duet Display from something like Astropad is that Astropad only works on a Mac, whereas this works on a Mac and on Windows. Since it works on both, I wanted to test it on both, and so I wanted to come up with a baseline in order to test it out and figure out what are some of the similarities between the two platforms. Does it work just as well on either one? So I looked at this in two programs. The first is Photoshop, which I really enjoy drawing in, and the second one is Autodesk's Sketchbook. And in Photoshop, I'm using one of my favorite brushes. It's the brush I used a couple weeks ago in a Surface video where I was talking about the wobble. It's called Brush Beauty 2, and if you want to know exactly which brush I'm using, I'll link that down in the description. What I love about this particular brush is that it has a really wide range, so if I press very, very lightly, I can get a very thin line, and as I start to apply pressure, it widens out quite a bit. I find that this is a terrific pen to test pressure with because you can tell pretty easily if you're getting the kind of levels that you're looking for, and you can see is this thing going too fast? Is it going too slow? Is it really grabbing the pressure that I'm putting down on that pen? Whereas pens with slightly less range, you wouldn't necessarily notice those kind of variations in. So I know if it can handle this Photoshop brush, it can handle pretty much any Photoshop brush that I'm gonna throw at it. So first up, I looked at how this performs on Windows. The overall pressure and responsiveness felt okay. Every so often I did notice a skip in the line, maybe 1 out of every 10 strokes. I might lose it halfway through, or the pressure just wasn't quite going as quickly or smoothly as I expected. I did give it the old smooth diagonal line test, which has been the bane of my existence over the last couple weeks. As you can see here, it's buttery smooth. The only wobble that I'm getting is really the wobble you'd expect from drawing something by hand. I also wanted to see how consistently it holds pressure, so I drew a lot of curved things and circles, because when you're drawing a circle, if you start off with one level of pressure, it seems that as you kind of come around the circle, it's natural for at least my hand to apply a little bit more pressure, so I have to train myself to kind of keep that pressure consistent. So if I apply a little bit too much or a little bit less, I'm going to see that, and it seemed to handle that really well. This is a really hard thing to describe, and I think it's just one of those things that you kind of have to play with and try out yourself to really kind of understand what I'm talking about, because I can't quite put it into words. I just know that the lines were either coming out a little thicker than I wanted them to, or they were just too thin. And doing similar things on the Mac, I found myself running into very similar issues, especially when I was doing cross-hatching. Occasionally it was losing a line, occasionally it was losing pressure sensitivity. There were other quirks as well. Sometimes pinch and zoom would work, sometimes it wouldn't work, or it would just take a lot of pressure with my fingertips to try to zoom out just a tiny little bit. So I think that those pressure hiccups are not necessarily a killer, because I can undo it and redo the stroke and it seemed to work okay, but it's definitely something in your workflow that you probably should be aware of. This is about, if you're comparing it to say a Cintiq, it's like 75% of the way there. It's not like a complete replacement. So if you already have an iPad Pro and you want to use it on a Windows PC, I think this is a pretty good option. It's getting you very close to a Cintiq-like thing, and I think over time, as they continue to iterate on that software, I think they can get there. Since I did bring up Astropad a minute ago, I should probably bring up some of the differences between these two apps, because it's only natural to compare them. So the first thing you're going to notice is Duet Display is actually a second monitor. So you're going to see, say, next to your laptop, your iPad screen, it's going to be like a second screen. So if I'm drawing in Photoshop, I had to drag my Photoshop window over there, and I was using it on that touch screen. Astropad works a little bit differently. Astropad is actually mirroring a chunk of your display. So when I plug it in, I am actually changing this window to show what is going to be displayed on my iPad Pro. And I think there's pluses and minuses to both of these approaches. On one hand, by moving my applications over to another screen, I found that when I went to use the color picker or went to create a new document, what was happening is those dialog boxes were appearing on my laptop screen over here instead of right in front of me, and that was a little disorienting at first. Astropad runs into a similar issue since you're only grabbing a portion of the screen. Those dialog boxes might be partially off your screen, so I was always going back to the mouse to move them on so I could use all those controls. Now with Astropad, you can mirror your entire desktop display or laptop display if you'd like to, but that's probably a different orientation than your iPad has, so you're going to get black bars on the top and on the bottom. From the point of view of pen accuracy, I think Astropad still has an edge here. It's had more time to refine itself and get better. Here's my comparison of my two guys that I inked, and I just feel like the hatch lines are a little more like what I expect on the Astropad version. I can see things like the pressure sensitivity didn't kick on that left eye that I was drawing. I got sharper points on the eyebrows. I said earlier that I think Duet is probably about 75% of the way of being a graphics tablet replacement, whereas I think in my review of Astropad, I said that it was about 95% of the way there. So you can see, I think it's great that Duet is doing some of this stuff, but it has some catching up to do in the brush refinement territory. And here's a couple other things that separate Duet from Astropad. Duet display has to be plugged in with a USB cable, whereas Astropad can be used without it on Wi-Fi. On Astropad, you're going to be seeing more pixelated redraw. Now this is a performance thing, so you have less lag between your pen and your brush. And another thing, like I mentioned before, is that Astropad only works on Macs, whereas Duet is going to work on a Mac or a PC. Astropad, however, works on any iPad, so you can have an older iPad Air, one of the newer iPad Airs, and still be able to use it. Duet display needs an iPad Pro and an Apple Pencil. I don't think this is a big deal because I really kind of strongly dislike other iPad styluses, so requiring that level of pressure sensitivity and care seems like a good idea for any kind of drawing tablet. Astropad also includes a lot of customizable on-screen shortcuts, so I can map them to my brushes, or I can map an undo button to one of those. Those come in really handy when you're drawing on a screen. So there we go. Those are some of the updates they've made to Duet Pro. I think it's a great update. I think that if you're a Windows user and you've been dying for something like this, now you've got a pretty good option. If you're a Mac user and you've been using Astropad, I'd say continue to use that. It has a lot of benefits and features that Duet just hasn't quite caught up with yet. And sometime next spring, I'm going to be jumping back into Duet Pro and taking a look at some of their updates that they've done in the intervening months, because I'm sure it's going to continue to improve and continue to get better. If you have any comments or want me to jump into something specific that maybe I didn't talk about in this video, let me know down in the comments. You can always hit me up on Twitter as well. And that's all I've got for this week. If you appreciate these videos and like them, consider contributing on Patreon. That's all I got for now. I'll see you guys later.